God the Father is mentioned 6 times in the Nicene Creed, which was finalized at the Council of Constantinople in 381. He's mentioned in relation to creation, he's mentioned in relation to the Son, and he's mentioned in relation to the Spirit. He's very clearly mentioned in relation to into creation in the opening line. We believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. He's mentioned in relation to the eternal Son. We know that the eternal Son comes forth from the Father according to the Creed, and indeed he's homoousios, of one substance with the Father, coming forth from all of eternity and being of one substance with the Father. And then the Nicene Creed goes on to relate the Father to the incarnate Son as the one who died, was resurrected, and ascended to the right hand of the Father and reigns there for eternity. And he's mentioned in relation to the Spirit. In the first version, of course, it mentions that the Spirit proceeds from the Father, according to John 15:26. The Western Church adds in the 6th century, proceeds from the Father and the Son, and it goes on to say that the Spirit, along with the Father and the Son, is worshiped and glorified. So as we put together these 6 references to the Father in the Creed, we can reflect on 2 important realities. One is that the Father is from no one within the life of the Trinity. He's the source. He's the principle without principle. And then the other thing is that the Father is what we might call the fruitful root of the Trinity. He begets the Son, and he spirates the Spirit. And as we look at the Father within the divine life of the Trinity, on both of these truths, we can reflect on them in light of that first affirmation of the Creed, which is that he is the Creator. Now, that might be counterintuitive because there's much that we learn in creation, and it is unlike what is true of God eternally. For one, creation is dependent. It comes into being and is time-bound. It is not finite. It is by a decision of God. It is not by an eternal relation of God. But yet, as we think about creation, it is the first act in this world. It is the first, the source, the principle of all things that exist. And in Scripture and in theology, we have traditionally understood that certain acts in this world are appropriated to certain persons in the Trinity. Now, all the external acts of God are undivided, so the Father, Son, and Spirit are involved in everything that exists. But Scripture and theology has appropriated certain acts to certain persons because they are reflective of that person in the divine life. We often refer to the Father as the first person of the Trinity, and of course, creation is that first act. And so creation mirrors or reflects something true of the Father. Creation, that first act, the Father, the first person. Creation, nothing stands behind creation because it is first. With the Father, he is the unbegotten. He is the principle without principle. He comes from no person within the life of the Trinity. You never read of the Father coming from the Spirit or the Son, only they coming from him. And so creation is reflective of the Father within the divine life of the Trinity, as he is the principle without principle. He is the source of the other persons. We also see on this other point something of creation, something reflected in creation of the divine life. What do I mean? Well, in creation, you have a fruitful act, something that didn't exist coming into existence. There's power, there's fruitfulness within creation. And while we want to say that is unlike what is in God in many different ways, in that creation comes into existence and it wasn't in existence, there is something in the triune life that is true, that is reflected in creation. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas and Herman Bavinck clearly reflected on a principle within the triune life that is in the creative act. What do I mean? Well, When we think of God the Trinity, do we think of a lifeless, static, flat divine life, or do we think of an abundant, dynamic, fruitful divine life? We should think of the latter. And how do we see that? Well, the Spirit and the Son come forth from the Father in that the Father begets the Son. The Father spirates the Spirit. These are eternal. They are not decisions that come into existence like creation. They are eternal relations, and so they're very unlike creation. But they do have this fruitfulness in them that is reflected in creation. So while creation is very different from the divine life, there is something in creation reflective of this fruitful principle, which we find in generation, which we find in spiration. So as we think about the Father in light of the Nicene Creed, we see he's the principle without principle. He himself is unbegotten. But there is a paternal principle within the Nicene Trinitarian life, in that he begets the Son eternally. He spirates the Spirit eternally. And these speak to his abundant, full, dynamic life. So the Nicene Creed, it's a wonderful creedal statement reflective of biblical truths. Thanks be to God that it speaks to the wonderful Father, source without source, principle without principle, the one who begets the Son, spirates the Spirit. And thanks be to God, yes, that this life that is within the triune life itself is reflected in the creative act and even more in redemption, as we become sons and daughters in the Son by the Spirit.